Started. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Mondays with Moshe. This is Moshe Norman, your host, live from Lakewood, New Jersey, together with tonight's presenter, Shlomo Slatkin, who is a licensed clinical professional counselor. That's an LCPC, or here in New Jersey, we call it an LPC. I think every state has a different name. It's become such a prestigious degree that every state has to have their own name for it. And thank you, Shlomo, for joining. Tonight is sponsored, as always, by okclarity.com. Everybody here knows that we mental health professionals and therapists, most of us are horrible business people and hate promoting ourselves, but love promoting our work because we believe in the work that we do. But if you go to okclarity.com, you can check it out for yourself and see what a beautiful job they do in promoting you by creating a website for you and enabling you to promote yourself as you wish and put whatever content you want on it. So check out okclarity.com. Definitely worth taking a look at and signing up for a profile on okclarity.com. Thank you, okclarity.com, for sponsoring. Okay, tonight's discussion is on imago therapy. Now, I don't know a whole lot about imago therapy, but I do know what it's based on and what the driving theory is behind it, which is actually very important, very old school, and kind of what we therapists really believe in, which is that we all have our own business that we need to finish, and we all take that out as therapists. We, often are at risk of taking that out in our client-therapist relationship, and of course, we need supervision and monitoring in order to point out some of those potential mishaps, and how it plays itself out in our countertransference with clients. But this is something that's actually very much rooted in the theory of marriages and relationships and choosing of spouses. So that's going to be tonight's topic, imago therapy. Shlomo, welcome. Thank you very much for agreeing to participate and to do this discussion for us. This is the first time in 4 years that we're discussing imago therapy. Before we get to the meat and potatoes of the show, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you found imago therapy, or whether it found you? What's your background in this field and relationships? Tell us.
Sure. It's interesting. It's a story that a lot of my colleagues seem to have. I'm not sure if it's unique to Imago or other relationship paradigms as well. But when my wife and we were about married for almost 2 years, had our first child, and we had I would say some of the general bickering that couples have in the beginning of a relationship. But it got to the point where we realized we needed to do something about it. And so my wife Sheto Macher told her about Imago. A colleague of mine told me about Imago and referred a specific therapist to us. So we thought it must be a shkacha pratis. We both heard about it, and we went to see an Imago therapist. And at that point, we were like a little bit, say, we were having a hard time and kind of disillusioned because we thought that we would be different than all the other couples. Everyone tells you during Shavuot Brachas, marriage is hard. And I said, no, we're good at communicating. Well, it's easy to communicate when you're talking about things that you like. When you're upset with each other, it's much difficult to communicate. So we went to this therapy session, the first session. It was an hour and a half, and we kind of didn't have an idea really what we were getting into. I'll have to say at the time I was actually getting my master's in counseling psychology. In the marriage and family course, we had to do book reports. So someone did a book report on Imago, and they did a little presentation about it. I remember seeing the book in someone's bathroom. So I heard about it, but I didn't know much about it. And so I was coming from the little bit of a therapy background. I wasn't really interested in becoming a therapist per se. I was getting into Rabbanos. I wanted to have a shtetl. I was doing interviews around the country, and I thought it'd be a good idea to get a degree on the side, because obviously Rabbanim are dealing with people coming to them with the challenges, especially couples. So anyway, we're doing this first session, and it was unbelievable. We were talking about this. My daughter had a closet rod and that was broken. There was a hole in the wall, and my wife asked me to fix it. And it kind of went in one ear out the other. I'm not very handy, and I'm not sure why she asked me to fix it, but I guess I ignored it. So we went to the therapy session and we have whatever the introductory exercises, and he starts having my wife have a Mago dialogue, meaning a conversation about a particular frustration in the relationship. So she shared this small frustration that we have a closet rod, it's broken. I asked you to fix it, you didn't fix it. And I'm thinking like, I'm not a handyman. What do you want from me? But I engaged in the process. And I'll explain more about it a little bit, but I had to mirror back what she said. No interjection, no response, no reactivity. What I heard you say is that you asked me to fix the closet rod and I didn't do it. And he started deepening and helping her explore where it's coming from, why it bothers her. And of course, it really had nothing to do with the closet rod. It had everything to do with her childhood. And when we both got to that point, when I heard that, I had newfound compassion for my wife. And when she was aware of it, she realized, oh, this really doesn't have that much to do with you. It has more to do with me. And when I heard the story of her as a little girl, her parents got divorced when she was 12. This is all my wife's, we share about our story publicly, so it's nothing that. And she basically felt the moment that her mother took her away from her father's house when he wasn't home, she felt like she was leaving her childhood behind. And she was no longer a child, she was an adult. She was the oldest of three girls. She felt like she had to take care of everybody and she had to be responsible for everything. So when I met her, she was in school full time, and then she had three part-time jobs, like Hebrew school and working for the law office and all this. It was just she had the weight of the world on her shoulders, and she had to take care of everything herself. And here she finds me, finally finds someone that she thinks who's going to take care of her, and then I let her down because I'm not reliable. She can't count on me to fix something. So obviously, it was more about the trigger than because she realized that I'm not a handyman and she doesn't know why she asked me, but because of the trigger, it put her in a place where she wasn't able to distinguish between the past and what was going on now. And she was fixated on me fixing the problem.
Mhm.
Once she realized why it bothered her at the end of the session, it was very emotional. We were both in tears. We felt like we were like, chassan and kala again. We had a newfound hope for our relationship. And she asked the therapist, she said, what are we supposed to do now? We didn't come up with a solution. This was really nice and helpful. She said, come back next week. So we got in the car, went home, and my wife decided to open up a phone book, which they used to have the yellow pages back in those days, and she called a handyman. And she says to this day, I never thought about calling a handyman because I was so in stress mode. I was what we call in the Imago, we'll talk about the reptilian brain. She was so much in her reptilian brain and very in that reactive part in survival mode that she wasn't able to access all of her wisdom that she could have accessed, that she did access afterwards once she felt safe. She was triggered and she was stuck in that kind of trauma response. And the only solution was for me to fix the problem.
Mhm.
So that was our beginning of our journey into Mago. And at some point, my our therapist suggested I do the clinical training, and that was kind of history. From there, I wound up pursuing that path and doing advanced certification. And my wife and I do a lot of work together. She's not a therapist, but we've been doing this for over 20 years,
Wow.
privately and professionally almost as well. We do the Imago Getting the Love You Want workshop, and I'm now on the faculty training other clinicians to actually become certified Imago therapists.
Beautiful.
So that's the
And my understanding is that you
right.
give trainings for the Ferenc Institute. Is that trainings on imago therapy or is that
Yeah, I've done trainings for yeah, for the France Institute, like an all day intro to Imago. That's like a survey course, sort of an intro, and then beyond that, if people want to actually get certified, it's a whole three modules. It takes about a year to go through the training to actually become a certified Imago therapist.
what? Shlomo, tell me a little bit about the driving belief behind imago therapy. Very interestingly, who we marry, who we get excited with, why we choose, for those of us who choose, why we choose the spouses that we do. What's some of the theory behind that?
Sure. So the word imago means image in Latin. And the idea is that we all have an unconscious image of our ideal partner. And according to the theory, that unconscious image is a composite of the positive and negative characteristics of our primary caretakers. So basically, you're going to marry somebody very familiar. It does sound very Freudian. Some people kind of get, some people have it rubs them the wrong way. But we'll talk about even how it's still helpful, even if whether you buy into the theory or not. But I see more often than not, I would say like 99.99% of the time, it's spot on. So what we have is you're looking for someone very familiar. So we understand why you would want somebody familiar, why somebody who would remind you of the good things of your childhood, but why would anyone in their right mind want to recreate the negative parts of their childhood? So this is all happening on a subconscious level. No one's consciously looking for this person. And this is why, we're drawn towards this person. That's why there's an attraction towards this person. And even if, and people always, ask this question in terms of from community, and of course it depends on the dating, but even people that are not doing what we call like the Western like romantic dating, there's still a strong connection many people feel. And even if you have a situation where you have like a show, there's still I find that people still feel a connection, or they feel something, an impulse towards this person. They're It's not like people say they have these TV shows where you have to actually get married, you meet them at the altar, so you don't even have a chance to see, which is of course against halacha. So you have to be able to interact with the person, meet them, and that meeting, if you have a right of refusal, there's a reason why you don't connect with this person and you do connect with someone. There's a chemistry, there's something there that you can't necessarily put your finger on it. But especially if you're dating someone, I don't know, I would say not even a long-term basis, but you're having more conversations just one or two times, you get to know them, you feel a pull towards them, and there's a reason why you feel a pull towards them as opposed to anyone else. And that's because they are your imago. And so you see only the good things during that, what we call the romantic stage. And that's the hook that gets you in the door. Because if there were no romantic stage, most people would not get married. If people knew what relationships were all about, what they would be like, which,
Just from a cognitive perspective.
yeah, if they knew the struggles that they would deal with, they would probably think twice. And I liken this to the whole, just because in Yana de Yoma, Pesach, Sfir Sarma, and Shavuos, that Pesach is akin to the romantic stage. It's this idea with Lech Lech Achar B'Midbar B'Aretz Lo Zerua, we follow Hashem. It's the time of Shir Shirim. Hashem, because we were on the Memtas Shari Tuma, that we were going to be stuck in Mitzrayim, Hashem has to, through His love, takes us out and gives us this revelation consciousness that we would not have had otherwise. And it makes us blind to all of the potential challenges along the way. When we left Mitzrayim, we weren't thinking about what's going to be like in the Midbar. But once we leave, then it's like, what do we get ourselves into? We want to go back. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe we should go back to Mitzrayim. That's the same thing that happens in the power struggle. The power struggle is the romantic stage gets you in the door, but then the power struggle is the stage where we're second guessing ourselves. We're wondering whether someone else would have been better. That's when all the luster wears away. And even though there's still a connection, we start beginning to fight. We start having challenges, and we start actually getting triggered by the negative parts of our imago that we overlooked in the romantic stage. And for a lot of people, we can look back and say, I could have told you the issues I would have had now that I think about it, but I was too blind. I was too blind to see. I remember my wife and I joked, we were talking about on our second date, we're sitting there talking about what's our idea for having family, and my wife said, I'm not the mommy type. And she grew up in a home where her mother is a professional, and she encouraged her daughters to become professionals, and kind of, wasn't into like the stay-at-home mom. And my mother worked part-time, but she was home most of the time. And I knew I didn't want to hear it. And now, 5 kids later, this has been a challenge for this has been a challenge for us. Oh, we worked through it over the years, but this initially became a challenge and a hard thing because this was not necessarily what she may have envisioned. And we all have our own baggage from childhood that we bring to the table that complicates things. So, I mean, I'm saying very briefly now, we can go into more in depth, but once you have the romantic stage, then we go into the power struggle. The power struggle is, as I said, that's where people are second guessing. That's where people are going to come to your office. That's where they're going to have the challenges. unless it's a pre-married couple that was mandated by the rabbi to come for counseling. Otherwise, even pre-married couples, some of them, a lot of them have challenges and they come for counseling because they need support. So the couples are coming to, they're in the power struggle, and the question is, what do we do with them in the power struggle? If you look statistically, in at least the general community, half of couples get divorced. Unfortunately, a lot more and more divorces in the frum community as well. And then you have other people that stay together for many noble reasons, for the children, but they're not necessarily, they're living kind of an invisible divorce. They're more like roommates and soulmates. And what imago therapy shares, and I think this is just sharing with couples this, even if you don't do imago with them, this theory and this idea, it's so encouraging because a lot of people think, well, my bad luck. This is just, I made the wrong choice. And we know if we really believe in hashgacha pratis, we don't believe that it was a mistake, as painful as it can be. But even more, what we can show a couple through the imago process is that there is a third stage, what we call the conscious marriage. We could liken this to Shavuos. That the sphere Sa'imer is a time when we actually have to do the work on our own. That's where you have the struggle. You're working through your midas and working through with each other. You get on Shavuos, you get even higher level than you got on Pesach, but that's through the work that we're doing, and that's what we're achieving in what we call in Imago the conscious marriage. That you need to have the romantic stage to get you in the door. You need to have the power struggle, but the power struggle is a means towards an end. It's not an end in and of itself, and that gives hope to a lot of couples because when dealing with couples, they're coming in on very low on hope, and one of our jobs as clinicians, especially as an Imago therapist, is to help hold the hope for the couple that not only just to say, oh yeah, things can be better, but to actually show them through the struggle that dafka the things they're dealing with, that is the answer, and that is the reason why they chose each other. So to come back to the imago, that we're looking for someone who's going to remind us of the positive and negative. Why is this? Because we say that marriage is the unfinished business of childhood. It's an opportunity for growth and healing. So it's not just your bad luck, or it's just not just like, why to feel sorry for yourself that I'm suffering, and people are suffering in relationships. Relationships can be the hardest thing you could ever do. But if you can understand what's going on in the relationship, and if you can become conscious of the power struggle, instead of getting locked in the issues, you go beneath the surface to see what's really holding it up. And what's usually going on is that's that story, it's that imago, it's the childhood baggage that both people are bringing to the table. And that childhood story, that's what's really butting heads with each other. It's not really the issues.
Hmm.
This, I mean, I'll pause here. I know there's a lot more I can say, but we're going to
Okay.
ask a
Okay, let
question.
me ask you something.
Yeah.
A common statement after having identified, let's say I'm thinking about a particular client, but this has come up so many different times and so many different versions. But this particular one really stuck out in my mind. I found it to be very profound. I married my mother, who was very critical and made everything about herself and never listened to me. And even till today, I'm 40 whatever years old, and I still try to call my mother once a week, and I try to talk about myself, and she always turns it, somehow about her. So I married my mother because I'm still trying to get my mother to love me. And if I can get my wife to love me, then my mother is loving me. This was something that one of my clients identified about himself, about his marriage in the therapy process. Would that sort of fit in with this theory that the it's not just the familiarity, that it's comfortable and I'm familiar with it, but that there's something more to my unfinished business that I'm trying to bring full circle by getting my mother to love me through my wife.
Exactly. So exactly what you're saying, that Moshe, that by having that, and people might ask about this, people might have a problem with this because they're saying, depending on your spouse to kind of fix your problems, but it goes both ways. If you look at, there's two ways of dealing with the situation. If he's not aware of that, he can just he could say the story, you don't love me, you don't care about me, which may or may not be true. It may largely be projection. We say, if we call it the 90-10 rule. So it's 10% something that his wife is doing, but it's 90% his story.
Meaning it must, in his mind, when you say projection, just let me make sure I'm understanding this. It must be that you don't like me because my mother never liked me. And I'm trying to get you to like me, or I'm just continuing to be enraged that you don't like me. But in reality, she may actually like him.
Right, but his
His story is
story.
that it's impossible that you liked
Right.
me, so he therefore he interprets whatever happens as, see, it's happening because you don't like me, you don't care about me. So he's reenacting the relationship with his mother. He wants his wife to complete that circle and finally love him, but he can never actually experience it.
Exactly. And if he keeps complaining to his wife about how bad she is, then she's
Right.
going to continue doing what he doesn't want to do. So if he can share with his wife what this reminds me, when you react to me like this, what this reminds me of from my childhood, my mother, and it can evoke her compassion to help her understand where he's coming from. Not only will she not feel defensive because she realizes it's not really about her, she could also have compassion for him, and she can also stretch to show him and meet his needs and to give him the love that he did not get growing up,
Because it becomes
vice
more
versa.
about what I call in my training, my marriage training, it becomes about what I call mutual understanding. So it's like when I react a certain way, you understand that my reaction, I call it the airport fight, which is any couple who's running to the airport and they're running late. There's always that lot of tension,
Right.
of like if they're taking the family to the airport and voices are raised. It just happens, right? And it's like, but we both understand, or especially if we can discuss this the night before. Hey, look, we're going to be yelling at each other tomorrow, but this has nothing to do with our relationship. It has to do with the stressors that we're going to be facing, right? So, if they can create that mutual understanding and then that mutual compassion, is much more likely to take place, and it becomes much less of a defense offense fight.
Yeah, the more you're aware of it, and also because it's triggering this past when a person is being triggered, they can't distinguish between the past and the present. So it's if he's experiencing his mother again as that little child. And if you think about like someone PTSD, they're walking down the street in middle of Manhattan, they hear big noise and let's say they were in combat in Afghanistan. They're going to feel like they're back there again. They're viscerally, their body's going to feel like they're back in that situation. So when he's in that situation with his wife, he feels like this is his mother,
The
and he
same
can't.
those same visceral reactions are coming up for him as if he's living that same past experience.
Right,
Yeah.
and because of that, he's also not going to be resourceful. He's not going to access his, higher self or his cognitive faculties. He's going to be in his survival mode, and he's going to go into whatever adaptation he learned to survive growing up, which undoubtedly will be the opposite of his wife. So that will just further, I guess, add fuel to the fire.
I have a question for you about the theory of the Imago theory that we marry our unfinished business. I've thought about this a lot, and one of the challenges that I come up with is, can we find unfinished business in virtually, almost anybody that we date or that we spend time with? So with you, the unfinished business is going to be in one area. With another person, because I have 10 different unfinished businesses. I have 10 things that I want from my spouse or need for my spouse, or 10 things that I need to give and provide and be a provider, for my spouse. Won't we be able to eventually come up with something for virtually most people that we meet?
Right, so your question is whether in theory, what is this dafka for a love relationship, a marriage, or is it something that it sounds like it could be for any
Oh, no,
relationship?
no, no, that's not what I'm asking. That's another good
Yeah.
point. I'm asking if I were to date 10 women, right? If I were
Mm.
to have dated 10 different women across the my dating span, wouldn't I be able to find something or some things in each woman that are going to meet my needs somewhere in some unfinished business? And as I get the concept, I'm going to date somebody. That person is going to have, some of my weaknesses they're going to be able to fill, some of my strengths they're going to be able to receive. Let's just say, for simplicity's sake. But if I meet 10 different women, won't I find something of that in all of them? Why would one person
Or
draw me
one person.
more than somebody else?
So I would say in theory you can recreate it. So this is a question: if somebody didn't have a romantic stage, how could this work? Harville Hendricks says you either pick, you project, or you provoke. So if you have whatever your childhood issue, let's say I have an issue that I didn't feel heard growing up. So I'm either going to fall in love with somebody who has a hard time listening,
That's right.
but I'm going to feel like when the romantic stage, they're a good listener, but once we get the power struggle happens, they're not a good listener. Or I will project that they're a bad listener. I'll just make up a story that you really don't hear me, I don't feel heard, you don't get me. Or I will complain so much and provoke them that they will become a bad listener. So either way, you're going to marry your imago. And so to answer your question, in theory, anybody that you can be in a relationship with, you can get triggered by, or you can project the issues, because the idea is like you're looking, we're all here to perfect ourselves, looking for that tikkun to become complete people and to work on ourselves and to repair whether it's childhood issues or what are we lacking from growing up. But the because we're wounded in the relationship, the closest possible relationship we can have, which is with our parents, the most formative relationship, we're usually looking to heal that through an intimate relationship, meaning somebody that we actually commit to and marry, not just someone who we meet, even go out with. There's something about that. And that's why we're drawn towards that person. Again, according to the Imago theory, there's that the subconscious mind, we're attracted to this person over anyone else.
Yeah.
So you could go out with 10 people and you can say, okay, I had a good time with them, they're interesting, but like the person that you're drawn towards, who you want to make that bond, who you're going to have the most intimate relationship with, adult relationship with, that's going to be the one who's going to carry the bulk of the burden.
So
And
in other words, the person that I'm going to feel most drawn to is going to be the one who is touching on my greatest baggage or weakness or area of um repair that's necessary.
exactly.
That's what. Now, what would I also inversely would I be attracted to somebody if going with the example of I was never heard or listened to as a child? Would I be attracted to somebody who's a superb listener?
Well, they probably will be a superb listener during the during the dating period. That's the trick, and that's why people feel a little bit disillusioned, because they think, well, I thought I married this person, I married somebody else. Because in that romantic stage, we all of the defenses and all of the messages and that we've done, or parts of ourselves that we've repressed growing up, we're able to shed those during that romantic stage. We feel, people feel like they can, lift a car or something. There's special powers at that stage. And that's the magic that gets people in the door, when your brain's being flooded with all the neurochemicals that you're not able to see pain.
So
Not able
the best of us comes out,
The
and those
best of us comes
and
out,
those
and
are
not even the best, but actually our potential,
yeah.
the part of ourselves that we cut off. So, for example, if you married someone, if you were attracted to this person because they were a great listener, but it turns out they really weren't, but they have the potential to become a good listener. And we say in Imago that when we're complaining about what our spouse is doing or not doing, it's as if we have a sign up and we say we hold the blueprint for our partner's growth. We're showing them, look, I know that you can be a good listener. I saw that you can. I know you have the potential. And my complaint is not that I'm shaming you or blaming you that you're a horrible person because you don't listen to me, but it's almost as like my need is really compelling you to grow and step up to the part of yourself that you may have disowned growing up or cut off or not, or kind of let atrophy, and
Beautiful.
vice versa.
So in other words, there is a stripping of many of the defenses that's sort of revealed or opened up during the romantic phase. Then the defenses, the old relationships are reenacted by his or her behaviors, and then the reactions and responses to the behaviors, whether they're actual behaviors or, like you said, projections. And then let's just say in our case, she becomes frustrated with him because he keeps feeling that no matter what she does, she's not loving him, even though she is. And then he succeeds to reenact the relationship that he had with his mother, right? That he's feeling unheard and unlistened to. She starts to unhear and unlisten to him because he's becoming difficult, and
Right.
and his bottomless pit is never met, right? And so boom, there we are again. They reenact, and that's why I always tell couples, and some of the supervisees or clinicians that I train. It's such a difficult concept for some people to grasp, is that in a dynamic or in a relationship, both parties are contributors. They always somebody always wants to say the other one's crazy, right? But there's also a contribution. It's not always bad or wrong, but there's still a contribution. So my softness or my aggression may be my contribution to the dynamic and its enactment. And maybe something else has to be done, even if what I'm doing may be sort of say the right thing or a good thing, right? But it's still a contribution. Being too soft or being too rough with a spouse who's going to take advantage of that is going to contribute to this problem in the dynamic.
Yeah, that's an important point because that both people, there's never, I find a lot of therapists, they like to pathologize or they make it about one person being the problem. And one of the things, unique things about Imago, I mean, I know we're talking more about the theory, but kind of getting into the practice, we don't pathologize. I mean, sometimes you have to give, for insurance purposes, you have to give a diagnosis, but otherwise, we're not pathologizing. We're not here taking sides. We're looking at the relationship as a unit, and we're helping them both take ownership for what they're doing to contribute to this system here, this dynamic.
I remember learning as a student or as an intern that your client is the person who's sitting in front of you, and when you're working with a couple, then the relationship is the client. When you're working with a family, then the family dynamics is the client.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it gets very dangerous when you start taking sides. Somebody told me today, called me, and this is of course an ethical violation, but she was saying how she feels that the therapist, he sides with her husband and doesn't really challenge him on if he thinks he has a drinking problem. Said, yeah, he even he was awarded, got some honor, and he gave her like one of these like edible arrangements. The therapist sent the husband an edible arrangement. So you see, like you get to that's obviously possibly an ethical violation, giving a gift to a client. But you see that,
But Shlomo, so let me
yeah,
ask you.
yeah.
Ed, do you want to finish that first?
I'm just saying it's important that we have, as you said, to realize that you're the therapist for the couple and not for one party or the other.
I guess one of the challenging things for me as a therapist, maybe us as therapists, is there are circumstances where you see that there is one spouse who is truly pathological, and we can talk about pathological being just a result of trauma. We could talk about borderline personality being a result of trauma, and that's all true. Yet there are times where one spouse's behavior is so absurd or so um, uh, intolerable for or what you would call a checkmate or a dead end, dead ended, that it's really difficult. I find for myself, to really find hope or trust that the other spouse will be able to hold, and it's almost like not reasonable to expect or imagine that the other spouse will be able to hold them. So two questions on that. Number one is there such a phenomenon where one person is so uncontrollable that you know you can't just work in the conventional fashion? And number two, do we assume that I guess does Imago assume that the other spouse married them because of whatever Imago needs they had?
So the what I'm hearing you say is that you're wondering in certain cases, could it be that someone's so pathological that you can't work with them and I guess in this format or in normal therapy format, and then maybe this one person is, the problem. And then the
Is
other,
there ever such a concept? Again,
yeah,
I agree with you in general that it's typically the relationship and the dynamic, and the back and forth and the enactment. But are there ever times where one person is just not workable, is so far gone that it's
yeah,
really,
I mean,
really not just the enactment?
there are a lot of people that people would probably say that about, and I've seen some of them, and I've seen how even despite that, people will call me all the time to say, well, before they come, well, I think my wife is borderline and my husband's a narcissist, and I try not to really give too much credence to the labels, especially if they're going to come to therapy and do the work. And I have seen people really turn things around. And even people like, I'm pretty, I would say, I'm the type of person who doesn't get triggered too easily. But even like the handful of times where I've gotten triggered and almost like wanted to fire a client, I've seen that just keeping them through the process, and if they keep coming week by week, that things can shift. Now, I cannot say, I'm not going to say every single case. If someone's, a psychopath or it's a different story. But even the case, I can't say that every single case, there's no exceptions. But I can say that I would more than we would think, there are opportunities for the people who are extremely difficult to be held through this process. And the other thing is to realize that there's a reason why this person picked them. At least this is the Imago perspective, you know, and it's not up to us to say, we might think, what's this person is really like over the top. And that might be true, and that we might feel that way, and we should be aware of what they're triggering in us and the counter-transference that might be going on.
Mhm.
But and work through that, but also to realize this person wants to stay married to them. They're here, they want to work through it together. So from my perspective, as long as they're willing to follow the process, I'm
Mhm.
there to support them. If
Okay.
one person is kind of doesn't want to follow the rules and do what we're doing, then it makes it very difficult.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as long as they're both are trying to do the work, even if one person seems to be extremely difficult, I still believe I'm not saying it's not hard, but I still believe that there is work to be done and that there is opportunity for healing. And it might take a little bit longer than two people that are just a little bit more easygoing.
Okay. I find this fascinating. If anybody has questions, you remember the rule, just raise your hand using the reactions tab on the bottom right of the screen. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. I want to ask you another question. This is also something that I found challenging in couples work. So in the process, I guess you didn't get that practical or hands-on in how the imago therapy works, step by step, so to say. But what if you have one spouse who is willing to get vulnerable, who even wants to get vulnerable, and the other spouse really does not have the capacity to hold them? So, you started off in your introduction about the story with you and your wife, and it sounds like a love story. It sounds very beautiful. You both went in with an intention. You both got it. You understood what the therapist was doing. At least once the process started rolling, you understood it. You understood each other. But sometimes you have one spouse who's not willing to. They say they are, but they're not really willing to hold the vulnerability or the sharing that their spouse did. And in fact, oftentimes they'll twist it or say, "You see, I didn't get to speak that long. You're talking longer. You're taking over the whole thing," and they really don't um, you know, cooperate with the process. Now, the only other thing I could imagine doing is turning it back to the other spouse and saying, I wonder what your spouse is going through. But then it kind of turns the entire session on just one party. How do we deal with that? Because I find that to happen pretty often.
Right. So you're wondering when there's a discrepancy between, one spouse that wants to be vulnerable and share, and the other person doesn't seem to want to be able to hold them, and they kind of get reactive and then make it all about them.
Yes.
So, I mean, one of the things that I find helpful is it's really the process, and this we can talk a little bit about. And some people might make fun of Imago and they say it's a very rigid or it's a communication tool, but the process is what creates the safety. Couples are coming in, and the issue that they're having with each other is not with each other, but it's with their each other's adaptation. Meaning the adaptation is how we learn how to respond and get safe when we growing up. So sometimes people minimize their energy and they kind of shut down when they don't feel safe, and other people maximize their energy and they get really big and loud and emotional. And we have the dynamic in a relationship, and these things trigger each other, and it's a virtual loop. It keeps one person, the more one pulls away, the more the other person pursues, the more one pursues, the more they pull away. So we have this dynamic, and we have this, and the way that Imago remedies this is by creating emotional safety by a very structured process. Because when the brain gets into that survival mode, into that reptilian brain, it's not thinking about what's right or wrong, what's logical or problem solving, or how can I be there for my spouse. The only thing they're thinking about is themselves and protecting themselves. And we all have this negativity bias because we want our, if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need to be safe. And if we don't get that, we can't achieve love or anything else. So the process of imago slows things down and it allows people to feel safe with each other. And the more reactive a couple is, it's going to be harder and you're going to have to go slower. So you can't just throw them in and say, okay, let's talk to me about all your problems and let's listen to your wife share with you about what's bothering her and be there for it. You have to go slowly. Um, More and more, we're focusing on talking about the positive first, sharing appreciations, doing some more work in terms of getting people in their bodies, centering them, breathing, meditating, whatever to get them fully present and out of that very, survival mode and really into the full body and full mind so that they can really be fully present. So for me, it's all about creating a safe environment so that that person can be there for his wife or for her husband. And it still might be that one person's going to be more vulnerable and one person's going to share more and one person's going to have more insight and access to their childhood and the other person maybe doesn't want to go there. But I find that by slowing things down and by leading them in the process where, at least in Imago, one in the dialogue process, one person shares, the other person has to mirror what they say. They're not allowed to interject. They're not allowed to say anything. And and it could be a few times in the beginning they might start interjecting, but you have to gently guide them and tell them, you know, take a pause, that's from your world, send that back to your world. You want to be fully present with your spouse. And as we practice that, they start to get the process. And we say that if you listen long enough, everyone makes sense. That the reason that it's hard to listen is because it doesn't feel safe. And it might feel like our spouse is attacking us. But if we can understand what's really hurting them, and if we can get help, we can help the client understand the spouse who's sharing his vulnerability and feel that, then usually they're not going to get reactive because they realize it's not about them. But that might be difficult for very reactive couples in the beginning. And that's why sharing even negative things about the relationship might not even be a good idea. So it would be better to focus on either positive things or something that's neutral, where there's going to be less reactivity until you build that rapport and build that safety.
Mm,
So I, it is a common thing, but it's something I believe that can be remedied by holding them in a safe process.
mm. So I guess, the image that comes to mind is the case of a husband and a wife, and then the husband says this thing, and then the wife starts to complain that, he's taking over the whole session, and then she goes and takes over the whole session. And when we try to slow her down, she just says, you see, you see, you see, you see, you're not letting me talk, or you're not letting me get my point across, or you didn't interrupt when I didn't interrupt when you were talking, you're interrupting when I'm talking, and et cetera, et cetera. And how would you slow something like that down?
Well, see, part of it is setting the game, and I don't know exactly what everyone does with their couples, but the way that we do it, we set the rules from the beginning. So we make it very clear exactly what's expected. The couple's facing each other. They're not talking to me about each other, they're talking to each other. One person talks, the other person mirrors back. I'm there to help facilitate that, to help coach the whoever's listening be able to respond and mirror back as opposed to react. I give them, I would say, like a little bit of background information why that's important so that they understand the theory behind it. So hopefully they get the cognitive part, and then as we work with them, that they're going to, and they're not always going to follow my directions, but most of the time they will. And if they don't, I gently correct them and encourage them to stay in the process.
Mm,
So usually once that's done, the other person is not kind of sitting there waiting to share their piece. And especially if the person's vulnerable, they realize, as you said, if they realize it's not really about you, it's about them.
mm,
So it's like I didn't, for example, the closet rod. I mean, it's a silly example, but I had no need to share my story about the closet rod and say, well, how dare you ask me, get mad at me about fixing a closet rod? I don't know how to fix a closet rod. Why are you making such a big deal about it? It had nothing to do with the closet rod. And that's the point, that once we realize it has very little to do with the content and it's more about the process, a lot of that reactivity and that need to respond goes away.
Excellent. Let's take a question from Shulam. Go ahead.
Okay, so just had a question about getting I had a situation where the couple was sitting there and the father, I'm doing a family therapy, but I'm just working with a couple for now. But
Mhm.
anyway, I was trying to get them to communicate with each other. So one of them is more of the aggressive, and one is the more type to shut down. And the one who's more the type to shut down, I was getting that one to open up and speak. And then I interrupted it and said, "Is your spouse going to use this against you? Because I know the history a little bit." And that spouse actually admitted and said, "Actually, I've already used this against the other spouse." So I felt personally as a therapist, I was being irresponsible by getting one spouse to open up a little too much, when that's going to be used against that spouse. Like, I mean, there's probably some groundwork that I should have laid before, but I'm wondering what your perspective is on that.
So tell me, your question is whether to ask someone to open up when be vulnerable when you know that might backfire in terms of spouse would
Yeah,
use it.
like when the spouse is upset and will yell something and hurt them where it hurts.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I think that's a risk that we have in any couples therapy, that anything that you say in the session could be used against you, in theory. Now, we would hope that a couple would be respectful and not do that and be able to respect the space and respect the vulnerability and to realize that you're not going to get what you want in the relationship if you don't make it safe for both people to share. And if you use it against, if someone opens up and is vulnerable, it's like people, they complain their spouse isn't vulnerable, and when they're vulnerable, they react or they use it against them. And then, why, you can see why they're not vulnerable, because you don't make it safe for them, and they're never going to be vulnerable again if you keep doing that. So it's kind of setting the ground rules. If you know about it even before coming in, that we want to be able to share here, and we want to create an atmosphere of openness and to create more connection and intimacy in the relationship. And we can only do that when both of you are safe for each other, and that means that you don't use it against each other outside of the session. Now, can you control that? Not, you can't entirely control that, what's going to happen, and if there's some fit of anger that someone says something, but you want to encourage them, and I hope that you're not going to would not do this. And I don't think it's a myth. It's not. I'm actually right in the middle. I'm assisting at a clinical training right now, and it used to be like a lot of the one of the trainers, she was saying that a lot of times therapists, like, we feel like if we get them to cry, then we feel good about ourselves, like we're doing a good job, or we get them to be vulnerable, and on the one hand, yes, we know that it could be helpful for a couple to be vulnerable or for an individual to be vulnerable, and it can be very healing. But we also have to realize that it's not about our agenda. It's about what they need. If we need to go at their pace. So it might be premature to push somebody. We're talking about childhood and all that, but it may be premature, depending on the situation, to be able to push people to talk about these things.
I think if I'm understanding Shulam's question, I think what precipitated it was there's a lot of sharing and holding in the Imago therapy work. And so what may appear to be helpful may actually become a trap. Is that what you're asking, Shulam? In other words, you're muted, but you're muted. But so now the husband is going to start to become more vulnerable to the wife, because that's supposed to be assisting in the process by the wife being able to hold that, just like he just did for her. And now really what we're setting up is a potential catastrophe. And then what do we do? If he can't be vulnerable, then what do we do? Is that what you meant?
Right. Yeah. Basically, yeah. Am I setting up for
In
I
the
mean, I'm gonna
process
lose the
itself.
guy. I'm gonna lose let's say the husband who's sharing. I'm gonna lose him, or as a client maybe. At least he'll shut down and he'll he won't trust me because I just put him in a position where he wasn't really safe. I exposed him to more attacks. You know,
But so
The question is, as part of the imago therapy process, I mean, we want that to happen in the process because that's how they'll hold each other better and become safer with each other. But potentially, are we doing them a service?
right, so you have to really assess based on the couple. You know, if a couple's coming in and they seem like they can do the process and they're not coming back with, you know, they've worked through some of their trauma already, it will be easier. If you have someone who's just very wounded, you're going to want to go slow with them. You're going to want to maybe do things that are not push them to be as vulnerable, but there's still a lot that you can have them share with each other and talk about it in a way that doesn't necessarily provide ammo.
To
And
start with much more basic, simple information.
positive things, appreciations, other connection building conversations that they can have. That you're not necessarily going to like the deepest issue and their childhood and pain and trauma they experienced. That may not be safe
right?
to bring up, right? For sure, not right away.
Thank you for that question. Does anyone else want a question or comment? Okay, can you use the raise your hand on the bottom by the reactions tab? You know how to do that? Otherwise, you could just unmute.
Okay. Hi. So my question is, in listening to what you're saying tonight, when a couple comes in for imago therapy, they really both have to be vulnerable and both ready, willing, and able to say, we have a problem. If one comes in complaining about the other, I don't know if imago is where they go. How do you draw them both into the process? When, you know, because how do you draw them both in if they're not agreeing that they want to repair the relationship, let's say?
So you're wondering if you have one person that's ready and the other
Right,
person,
once,
how to
right, like one person is stronger
Right.
about it. I want to save the marriage, or I want, and one says, all right, I'll come, how do we get them to both be involved so that they can both be vulnerable and both help each other?
I think that would be a question for any couples therapy. We always say there's a dragger and a draggee. There's always one person who kind of is the one who drags the spouse there, and the other person is not necessarily so interested.
Right.
A lot of times it's the woman who drags the man, and you know a lot of men don't like therapy. They don't like opening up and sharing. So, but on the other hand, men like the process. A lot of men like the Imago process because it's very structured and it feels safe for them. So the
See that.
rigidity of it can be very helpful
Yeah.
for a lot of the men. So I think it's just about the point is if they're both committed to staying in the relationship. I mean, it's one thing if one person has one foot out the door, is not interested, and is
Oh,
not committed to being married, then that's a whole different story. But the person wants to stay married, but they're not really interested in therapy. They're not. So it just depends on. So it really depends on the couple. I can't give like a across the board answer. You have people that still will leave and they're just like, like I don't want like this therapy stuff. I'm not interested. Then you have other people that really do open up and they learn and they become more vulnerable and because they have a safe place to be able to share finally. Because oftentimes the draggee is the one who doesn't feel safe to open. They're the minimizer in the relationship. They don't feel safe to open up. They feel shamed and blame. And when they have an opportunity to do it in a safe way, that can encourage them to participate more.
So the rules, you have it's structured, there are rules, and sort of, is there a referee in there too? Like, is it when
The
you step
therapist is a
in?
facilitator. I'm the facilitator. Call it a
Facilitator,
referee. It's
right.
the facilitator. They're not allowed to just like fight. It's like Einstein's definition of insanity. If you do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, that's insanity. And that's fortunately a lot of stories that we hear about. I'm sure nobody here, but a lot of people who do couples therapy that aren't necessarily trained as couples therapists, they have a couple come in, they're yelling at each other the same way they do at home. And you're not going to get different results because they're both acting from their reptilian brain. They're not going to be able to problem solve or work together or compromise. So we we want to be able to change the dynamic so that they can be able to communicate in a different way and experience each other in a different way. and once they have that safety, then that can bring in that partner who's not necessarily so gung-ho about coming.
Yeah, the romantic one that you went out with to begin with, maybe, like you could see that part again. The romantic person you
Yeah, I
dated to
mean, it could
begin
be
with.
see that part, and also just overall just feeling safe with them. Yeah,
Safe, yeah. Okay, thank you.
sure.
Okay. What else could you tell us about the process of the therapy sessions themselves?
Sure. So, I mean, the main vehicle that we use in Imago therapy is called the dialogue process. The Imago dialogue. It's called the intentional dialogue, couples dialogue, a lot of different names over the years it's been given, but this is the main tool, and this is the process that really allows people to be safe and to be able to work on things together. So just anecdotally, so today, as I mentioned, I was doing a training, and so I demoed one of the couples had to pretend that the therapists that were there in the training, one of them had to act out and pretend she was her difficult client. So she was the difficult client, and then someone else played the role of the spouse, and then I was the therapist to show them kind of how to manage it. And you saw at the beginning how the person was very reactive and kind of all over the place. And by the end, she calmed down considerably. So that my fellow trainer, she asked, what did I do? She asked me, what did I do to change the dynamic here? And I said, I just kept them in the process, just kept them in the dialogue. And when you keep them in the dialogue process, then the problems resolve themselves because we're allowing ourselves, when we get safe, we get to a different part of our brain. We get to, instead of being in the brain stem, instead of being in the limbic system, we're in the frontal part of our brain. And that's where we're able to problem solve. That's where we're able to get those new insights. That's where we're able to figure out about calling the handyman or whatever it may be, that the solution to the problem. So the Imago process is more about, the dialogue is process oriented as opposed to solution oriented. But the solution happens Mimela, because once a person has all the answers within them, you don't need the therapist to come and tell you or make a deal and tell you, if you take out the garbage today, then she'll make you dinner tomorrow, because that's not going to last, and that will lead to resentment. So the process allows the couples to come up with the solutions that work best for them. And it's good for the therapist because you don't want to take ownership for another person's life and their decisions. You want to empower them to be able to do that. And that's what the Imago process helps us to do, to help us to kind of equalize the playing field where it's two people here connecting with each other. So it's a slow process. One person I mean, I can go through all the details. I don't want to be boring here, but tell me
I
what
don't
you
think it'll be,
know
I
about
don't
it.
think it'll be too boring.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's most intriguing is enabling and bringing safety from spouse to spouse, because I find that's the area that makes the therapy the most complicated. Why should I be safe, or I don't know how to be safe, or the other person makes me feel unsafe, or I never was able to be safe to begin with, and enabling or cultivating that sense of safety, I see as the most challenging part.
Right. It is the most challenging part because people have a hard time regulating themselves. And I find that this process really gives you practical tools to be able to do that. So instead of just sitting there quiet and rolling your eyes and biting your tongue, you have to take a moment, and we'll coach, if I see someone getting reactive, I will have them take a moment, take a deep breath, really coach them through the process so they can be fully present. Even just setting things up so they can be fully present before the dialogue happens. But by doing the mirroring process, when you're repeating back what the other person's saying without interpretation, without adding your lens, without putting a spin on it, you are removing yourself from the content and really being fully present in the world of the other.
Mhm.
And it
You're
seems like a very
almost forcing
simple
yourself
thing.
to regulate. You're almost forcing yourself to regulate because
Yeah,
you have to filter all your narrative and interpretation that you would ordinarily add, or
exactly. it's almost like a meditation. You're all that chatter, you're kind of blocking it out and you're just focused on one thing.
Mhm,
What I heard you say is you're really upset with me because I came home late last night from work and I didn't call you.
mhm.
And you're thinking all of your excuses that you have and you're upset, but did I get you? And then if it's yes or no, and is there more? And you keep going. And this almost, even though it sounds like some people think it's like a little bit contrived in the beginning, but it's that repetition that kind of gets you in that, I don't want to say meditative state where you can leave your reptilian brain and access your prefrontal cortex and your frontal lobe and really be fully present. Like in meditation,
So
this
it's like it's almost important for it to be scripted so that you sort of get in the zone and become mindful of what it is that's effective and helpful rather than getting into a negative dialogue or a down spiral fight.
exactly you need the structure. It's like we think about like davening. If you could just daven, what we have rules, we have
Mhm.
a certain formula, and that's what gets us. That's where you can, and then you can infuse then you can achieve the connection. But you have to have that to ground the person, and it's taking out all that outer noise when you're doing the dialogue process and doing the mirroring, and it allows you to be fully present. And by the end, when you really hear where the person's coming from, as I said, you realize it's not about me, and then you don't even need to respond. And that's a beautiful,
Calms the atmosphere.
yeah. And you have compassion for the other person too. It's beautiful to see the transformation, the tension in the beginning, and then kind of how it turns out at the end,
Mhm.
and what we discover by just being. It's really just being present with another person. I mean, that's to simplify it, really being fully present and taking yourself out of it.
Beautiful. Okay, let's hear from Peril. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. My question is, when you're doing the mirroring process and the dialogue phase, do you ever have a scenario where one spouse is inaccurately representing what the first spouse said? The first spouse said, maybe I don't like the way you make pizza, and the second spouse says, you don't like me because of the way I make pizza. And if this happens repeatedly, I'm dealing with a client who I feel would bring that kind of presentation into the room.
Sure, yeah, that definitely happens. People misinterpret it, and that's why we asked, "Did I get you?" Because you mirror back, so you don't like me because I don't. You think I'm a horrible person because I make bad pizza. Did I get you? So what I wanted you to get was that I don't like I don't know what you said. I don't like the pizza that
The way of pizza.
like the type of pizza that you make or whatever it is. And if the person keeps reacting, I mean, you keep asking, did I get you? And if they're gonna reiterate what they said, and you can also even coach the person who's misinterpreting it. So just take a moment. I want you just to mirror back as close to verbatim as possible. That sounds, send that back to your world. That's from your world. That's your interpretation about it. But we really want to hear, just really focus on the words that she's saying and really get clear about what she's saying. And it takes a lot of patience, but after a while, you will enable people to actually hear what the other person's saying and not what they think they're saying. And that's huge because you see that with this couple, the misinterpretation and the stories that we make up through our own lens is what gets us in trouble.
Right. Yeah. I actually had an experience where I was working with a couple and they were doing this dialogue. They were highly reactive. And they actually came to realize that they both had kind of the same taina on each other, which was tremendously eye-opening for them. They
Yeah.
had something finally that joined them, even though it was like a mutual complaint, but it was really, really interesting. And just one other question, maybe you touched on this, maybe it's a narishkeit, but we talk about seeking out the imago, right, image. What do you say about people who have like a basho? They have like this one person they meet and like, how does that play into, are they really choosing that person and does it still hold true?
Sure. So I would say in terms of the one point I want to make about what we said before, and then I'll answer your question about the show.
Okay.
It's important to realize, the first time, I mean, I'm comfortable talking with having people bring in their big issues, but the first time you're going to meet somebody in practice this process, especially if you're learning how to do it, you want to pick like a really small issue, like a 1 or 2 out of 10. You don't want to pick like the biggest issue. I mean, some people come
Right.
because there is only one issue, but one big issue. But talk about something silly like, I don't know, I don't like how you don't fold the laundry after you take the laundry out of the dryer, and you'll be surprised that we've had couples demo something like that in our workshop, and it becomes a whole touching childhood experience. So the closet rod, picking something small like that, because if people have a hard time holding the reactivity, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be like,
Mm.
3 if you bring them in talking about like some of their big contentious issues. That's just a pointer. In terms of the Basho, so I found working with more Hamish couples that they've, even despite the fact that they didn't have this romantic dating experience, they still wind up marrying their imago. We have an exercise that we do where it's an imago workup where you write down the positive, negative characteristics of your primary caretakers. You write down what I wanted and needed most as a child and didn't get was such and such. You talk about childhood memories, etc. And the end, there's a whole, I don't know if you remember this as a kid, it's like Mad Libs. Basically, it's a story where you fill in, basically
Yeah.
cutting and pasting. So it's a story, my relationship journey agenda. I tend to be drawn towards someone who I sometimes experience as this. I always want them to give me this. And they're it's about their marriage, but they're taking all the information from their childhood and they read it. And most couples who have, romantic love relationship, it's almost identical. It's like, wow, this is my childhood story, but I'm reading about, I mean, this is my marriage, but it's my childhood information. It's identical. But I've even had couples who had a basho and they've done the same exercise and they see the same thing. So there's a few ways. We said before that you can either pick, project, or provoke. So you can, even if you don't pick somebody who has those, meaning you didn't go out with them on 10 dates or whatever, but you met them 1 or 2 times, but you still could project your childhood experience on them, or you can provoke them enough by complaining enough about it that you're going to get them to do the opposite of what you want. That's another thing. I also think hashgacha pratis, that the Eibishter sends you somebody that's going to be your tikkun. So you're going to find a lot of those issues come up. So I've seen that, and as I also mentioned before, that people now there are people who are under. There are situations where there's a basho and there's like tremendous pressure. There's like tremendous pressure from the parents, and I usually say to most couples, no one's walking you down the aisle with a gun to your head. Because sometimes there's people have revisionist history. They say like, I never really liked this person, but like if you went out with them like for 2 months, I think there was something you liked to decide to marry them. But in the circles where it's not like that, it's easier to say that. But still, if you have a choice and you don't feel, then you could still say that the same imago, I would say, romantic love or the impulse to connect with that person can still be there, even if you met them 1 or 2 times. You felt something about this person that you might not have felt about someone else. And if you didn't have that feeling or you were repulsed by them, you probably would not have married them. Again, unless there's extreme pressure, which I know that there are.
Shlomo, sometimes there's, I've heard from many couples, I didn't really feel anything towards this person when I dated them,
Right,
but I really wanted to get married very badly for one reason or another, to get out of my house,
right.
or I want to be the first one in my class married, or all kinds of
Yes, I heard
interesting
that.
stories that we've heard, right? Would you say I think I would imagine that to be a little bit different, not necessarily as an imago, but really as the person's sort of life's deficit or personality deficit playing out. Meaning if I am strong or I am healthy to some degree, it would never allow me to marry somebody who I have no feelings for just
Yeah.
because it's so important for me, because I'm compelled to get out of the house, right? So is that also an imago um, uh, doing that's creating this marriage, or is there another external component that will cause me to choose to marry somebody even though there's really no connection whatsoever, imago based?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Because you could say that you didn't give yourself a chance to really, maybe you could say it's a deficit in the personality. And you can also say that, in at least societally, or at least in that person's community, or family structure, that this was not family culture, that this was just they were taught that it doesn't really matter. You just marry somebody, and it doesn't matter if you have any like the person at all, or have any interest in the person, or have any chemistry or attraction. So, it's hard to judge that one, to know where it's coming from.
Mhm.
I think that you still probably will wind up finding the negative things from the imago, and you'll recreate the negative things. You'll provoke them and or project them into the person. I
Right.
do think that probably will happen. But I'll tell you, it's a lot harder working with couples that don't have that. The couples that have that connection, there's much more of a buy-in, because if they have a connection, they knew that they had something good once, even though it was short-lived. They're committed to work.
And it explains why there are couples, where one spouse is being so terribly abused, but they still want in on the marriage, and they'll tell you, I know that the good times are really good, or the good times were really good. In other words, they're
Right.
referring to what you call the romantic times, that there is something here that I really want, and there's this impasse or this blockage to that thing that I know is there.
Right. And it's easier to do. They're more motivated to do the work. I think there's two paradigms. You see in the Torah, you have Yitzchak and Rivka, and then you have Yaakov and Rachel. So it says that Yitzchak married Rivka, and then he loved her. Yaakov loved Rachel, and then he married her. So we tend to think in the Western society that you have to like the person first. I mean, I think it's much difficult if you don't, but ultimately it comes down to commitment. And if you believe, if you have, and I think it's also easier if you're coming from a family where from a community where it's more insular, and you have the same type of values, and your life's more simple, and you don't have like a million different options for what you can do with your life. And um, sometimes it's easy. In some ways, it's easier. In some ways, it's harder. In some ways, it's easier. But we do have I would say it's a luxury, but it's also maybe a liability, that we have the luxury of, well, if you think about what we're doing on this program, psychotherapy, the luxury of being able to talk about these things. If you think about our ancestors, like, running from pogroms, like, no one's thinking about love. They're thinking about, like, how can I put food on the table? How can I protect myself? And now, Baruch Hashem, in our generation, we can afford to talk about whether we're getting our needs met in relationships, but it has a whole another set of challenges and opportunities for growth.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions or comments before we wrap up? Let's go, Shandel. Please.
Oh, 1 minute. Hi, I'm sorry. So it's Fegir Benowitz, you know me.
I
I'm Shengel on the computer. Is there a case that you would say this couple, like, I'm thinking what Moshe was bringing up, like that's really a couple that one of them is narcissistic, very difficult to deal with. Would you say Imago, the method doesn't work for you?
So you're wondering if someone's a difficult, or specifically a narcissist, or just particularly difficult?
Yeah, like if you would tell a couple that you recognize that you say, okay, I don't think Imago would be, there are too many issues besides the communication. I would recommend whatever. Imago is not yet for you.
So I don't know if I'd make I don't want to say like it's one size fits all, but Imago, of course, Imago teaches couples how to communicate, but it's not just about communication. Communication is a means towards an end. We can't not communicate. That's how we have to interact. So we have to create this safe structure for communication. But it's more about the communication is a tool to create the safety. And people who are
Attachment.
the attachment, to create a
Yeah.
safe attachment. So we believe that people who are any bad behavior is due to a lack of safety. So we are all somewhat on, we call narcissists. We're talking about this today in the training. Narcissism. Now, there's some people, I would say, yeah, there's some people who are pathologically narcissists, but if they're coming to your office and they're doing therapy and they're willing to take ownership, then I'm not sure how much of a narcissist are they really. They might be annoying, they might be difficult to deal with, but I guess I kind of err on the other side. Instead of dismissing a person, saying like, this, I can't help you, or this can't work for you. If a person wants to do the work, or at least wants to show up, and we're all self-absorbed to some extent. Now, some people to the extent where it's a pathology. But if we believe in Imago that if we can create emotional safety, that a lot of these, I would say, pathologies that we see in people begin to dissipate and to go away. So I find that in the psychotherapy world is we pathologize too much. And a lot of people who have been given diagnoses may not want the diagnosis. And even, I've said to couples, whether or not you are, your spouse thinks you're borderline or you're narcissist, if you can change the behavior, if the relationship can be better, if you can get along better, if you can solve the problems, would you be happy? Or are you still invested in the fact that you think your spouse is messed up? And ultimately, people want change. And if we can get change, it doesn't really matter if a person has a label or not. So I personally believe, in my experience has been that, again, I'm not saying every single situation, but most of the situations where people are coming in thinking that there's something severely wrong, the safety of the process allows the people to shed their defensive adaptations, which are causing the problems, and show up as their best selves. And that's where the growth and the healing.
You're saying a lot of the narcissism is defense mechanisms upon defense mechanisms upon defense mechanisms. But if we could hit on and touch them in a soft place, which is if we can create love, if we can create attachment, if we could create connection, would you be willing to engage in that process, essentially?
Right. And everybody wants ultimately what we all want is safe connection, safe, loving connection. But we get caught up in the stories and the content.
He did say earlier that, someone like a sociopath or something like that, that's a whole different story. So maybe when you're thinking narcissist, you mean more towards
No, I'm more thinking about more like borderline personality, because I'm dealing now with a couple that really, it's clearly when one says A, the other one hears B, but even doesn't hear, but feels B, because that's a reality, because she has borderline. It's a very frustrating reality for the spouse. But I know we're not going to solve it here, but I just want to comment that I appreciate you bringing up the shared part, because it bothered me all the time that you said about Imago, and we choose, and I was thinking, where is the, it's קודם יציר הסבלד and בין פלוני לפלוני. So thank you, because I think that's why we are coming here. We should have the forum that fits our coffee. But thank you very much.
Shlomo, any last final words do you want to share with anybody about any trainings or?
Sure, yeah, I can share. So I'm doing a cohort coming up in the fall to train clinicians to become Imago therapists. It's a year-long training, and I'm going to put it in the chat box here. If you're interested, you can find more information.
Send it to me in an email, and when I send out the recording.
Okay, I'll send it. Should I put it in the?
You can put it in the chat box too.
Yeah, and then I'll just put my website here also. We also have a workshop coming up. I'm going to spell this right here. We have a Getting the Love You Want workshop coming up in Baltimore in July. So anyone's welcome. I personally believe that if you do this work, you'll be a better clinician. I think it's the same with any type of psychotherapy. The more we work on ourselves, the better we can be there for our clients, especially in couples, because to be able to understand what they're going through, because I went through it, gives me a whole different perspective and gives me more hope for the couples as well. So a lot of times therapists attend, or they send their difficult couples for 2 days for the workshop, and then they come back to you afterwards, and usually in a much better place. Bezos Hashem. But if you're interested in finding out about that, you can visit our website. And I work, just FYI, I mean, I work with couples, I work with people all over, not just in the Jewish community. So
Do you work on
Zoom? Yeah, I work on Zoom too. Yeah. So, it's just interesting because people, although our relationships are different, and there are many differences in hashkafa and everything. But a lot of the very human condition we see across the spectrum and the challenges that people face, and it's always interesting, especially in our group workshops, when we have from couples and we have non from couples or non-Jewish couples, and just to see that everyone feels a sense of commonality in the struggle of couplehood, and also the potential for growth and healing that lies in this process.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Shlomo Slatkin of Baltimore, Maryland, for joining us and for presenting on imago therapy. I found this to be fascinating. Anything pertaining to dynamics, as it is, I find fascinating. But I really think that this is something that's extremely valuable in the work that we do. And something to be mindful of. And I would encourage people to certainly train. Those of you who treat couples or want to treat couples, certainly reach out to Shlomo. And let's get involved. Okay,
Thank you,
have a
Moshe.
good
It's been
night.
a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good night.